Okay. How was lunch, everybody? Good, good. I want to welcome you all back. And I'm very, very pleased and honored and happy to introduce Jack Daley. He's an Uxbridge homegrown local person who's written an exciting and provocative book. And he's here to talk to you a little bit today about Blood of the Soul. Thank you for coming, Jack.
Hey. Thank you, Marcia. She makes it sound really good, exciting, and provocative. I don't know if it's any of those things, but at least so far the feedback I've been getting is good. Again, I'm Jack Daley. Some of you, I think most of you know me, and if not, I'm also chairman of the Council on Aging here. And what I think I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about how I got started doing this, tell you a little bit about myself, and a little bit about the book. I don't want to sound too long-winded. I know most of you are eating, and people would rather eat than listen to someone go on and on about himself. So I will be kind of brief. I started back when I was a child. In the third grade, I read my first novel, and it was a war novel. It was called To Hell and Back by a guy named Audie Murphy, who was the most decorated war hero of World War II. I was in the third grade. I was about 10 or 11 years old and had to have my dad help me and my brother help me. And I can remember very distinctly the librarian not wanting to loan this book out to me because I was too young for it. But my dad stuck up for me, and I ended up learning it, and that kind of opened the door for a lifelong love and appreciation of World War II issues. Later on, as an adult, am I loud enough for everyone here, by the way? Good. Up a little more? Okay. Later on, as I became an adult and I got married and whatnot, life kind of, I wanted to write, but life kind of took a different road for me. I ended up working in the field of psychology, and I had raised a couple of kids and had a house and a wife and the whole bit, and I found I didn't have time to do the writing that I wanted. And as a result, I made a few feeble attempts to start a book or start writing on some type of a topic or another, and it just never worked out too well. And then about 5 years ago, they always say God has, if you want to get a good laugh, tell God what your plans are. Now, I was planning on working till I was 66 or 67 and making lots of money and doing things, and then maybe I'd write. Well, I got sick a few years back, and I was unable to walk for a while. And I was sitting home, and it was cold outside, and it was windy and rainy, and I couldn't really leave the house, and I was kind of miserable. I was getting into a real pity pot. And that's my grandson over there giving me a cheer, a Bronx cheer anyway. I remember reading a book by Stephen King. He's the horror author, but he has one book out there that's not horror. It's called On Writing, and it's about teaching people to write. And I had the education behind me, and I had a lot of ideas spinning around in my head, but suddenly I decided I need to make this happen. Either that or I'm just going to sit home in bad weather feeling sorry for myself. So one morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, I sat down before my computer, before my word processor, and I started to write. And amazingly, the next thing happened as I looked up. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd been writing for 6 or 7 hours. And I had a story. And that story, by the way, is chapter 9 in this book. It's a story about a man who's lost behind enemy lines. It's probably the closest thing to an actual war incident in the book. This book itself, if I might tell you a little more about it, the book itself is about two families growing up in Germany. The I spent a lot of time in my life working in the field of psychology. And when I wrote this book, I tried to depict what makes people so evil. Because along the way, the thought occurred to me, how did the people of Germany, who were educated, Germany in the 1920s and 30s was the most cultivated country in Europe, how could they turn to such a monster as Adolf Hitler and end up causing the deaths of between 50 and 70 million people worldwide? What made a country like Germany do this? And it was kind of a collective evil. There's no simple answer to that question, but that's where my love of history, my love of World War II facts, that's where this all began, and that's what brought about the writing of this book. Now, this is a story of two families between the years 1932 and 1945. The two families, one family is Jewish, and the other family is what they called themselves Aryan. They were German nationalists. And they're growing up in the city of Hamburg. Now, this book is factually pretty correct. I did the best I could to make sure that when I wrote this, I got my facts right, got my dates and places and incidents correct. Just an aside on that, just before this thing went to publication, I realized I had a mistake, because I made reference to, if some of you who would remember issues from World War II, remember that all Jewish men, anyone over the age of 6 who was Jewish had to wear a Star of David. They were required by law to do that. Otherwise, they would be put to death. Now, I ended up putting the wrong date on that, and it had to go back and rewrite half a chapter. But I wanted to make sure that when I did this book was factually correct. That's very important. The characters are not real. Although to me, and as a writer, I can very much vouch for this, you sometimes feel like you've given birth to them. They are that real in your mind, in your heart. And I know it sounds corny as hell when I say this, but there was one of my characters that I killed off that I literally had tears in my eyes doing it, but she had to die as part of the story. This is what the story is basically about, these two families, the Jewish family and the German Aryan family, growing up together in Hamburg. There are a number of battle scenes. They are not all good people, and they are not all bad people. But very important for the reader to understand, I tried very hard to avoid the old stereotypes of the goose-stepping Nazi soldier. They were humans. They loved their family. They were sometime good people, and sometime they were very evil people. We also tend to picture the Jews in World War II as simply victims who walked headlong into slave labor. They didn't. They were forced into it, and many of them were great people. I will say I did make some heroism in the Jewish family. I added some what I feel was true heroism there. The book, someone asked me what my goal was in writing this book for the reader. And I can honestly say my goal is to make you think. I want people to think, to realize what brought an entire nationality, an entire huge group of people, what made them evil, what made them commit such horrible crimes. I want you to think about what it is to survive in a terrible situation like that. What keeps people alive? What makes some people survivors and others not? This book, as I said, my goal for all of you, if you choose to read this book, I want you to think. I want this book to really make you think about what went on in the world. They always refer to the soldiers who fought in World War II as the greatest generation. I'm very fortunate that over the years I've gotten to know an awful lot of people who fought in World War II, including, ironically, a German soldier, a member of the Wehrmacht, who was captured at Stalingrad. Now, if any of you know anything about that, 100,000 soldiers were taken prisoner. Less than 5,000 survived. He was released in 1953. He survived probably because he was a cook, and he wasn't a combat soldier, so they let him live. But these were people, that whole generation of people who fought for what they believed was a good purpose. I think basically I don't want to tell you too much about the book if you're going to read it, because that would kind of spoil the purpose of it. But I would like to open it up to questions. Do any of you have any questions about the book? No questions? Oh, Masha's hiding behind. I feel terrible. I've got my back to you, and I really shouldn't. That's grossly impolite of me, but.
I've been reading your book.
Yep.
And I've known you for a long time, so this really sheds some light on your thought process. I'm just wondering, how did you develop the characters? How did you come to develop these characters that really you do come to know and love as you read, and you're rooting for them, and you want them all to be safe in the end, and that's not always going to be the case. So tell me a little bit about how you developed those characters and how you came to know them, how you even chose their names, for example. Their names are so original and interesting to me.
How did I develop the characters?
Where did they come from? What sparked them?
Somebody said they come from this sick mind. I don't know. The fact is, you develop them one person at a time. Writing a story, this is a complex story. This book actually has 8 main characters, 8 characters who could be called important, very important to the story. And I linked each one as I wrote about them to another one. For example, when I developed the German family, I started off with this, chapter 9, a story about one of the German soldiers. And then I had to invent his parents because they were very important to the story. And then I had to invent a brother because I had another need for another character in the story. And when I did this with the Jewish family, it was much the same. I started off describing the Jewish mother. And then I started off describing the Jewish father, and then the 2 female siblings. And then I needed a hero for the book, somebody who kind of unite the whole thing, and that's when I developed the son, the Jewish son, who is the ultimate hero, he and the American soldier who kind of unite everybody. There's a lot of characters, like I said, but you make them up as the story needs them, and you make them real. That's how you write. You try to make them real. You try to make them authentic. When I say it, and like I said, it sounds corny as hell when I say it, to say that, you know, these people, I cried when I had to kill off one of them, but I literally did. Strangest true story. 10:30 one night, I got a phone call. It was from the lady who proofread my book. The lady in Boston, she called me up, and the first words out of her mouth were, "What the hell did you kill her for?" But like I told her, this is a story that takes place during war. This isn't about ballet. This is about war. And it's not pleasant, not always pleasant. I actually have a love scene, by the way, in the book. Some people think, knowing me, that that's kind of funny because I'm not usually warm and fuzzy. But I put a very nice, it's not a sexy scene, but it's a love scene in the book because one of my characters has a love interest, a young girl who should, at a time in her life at age 17 or 18, she should be learning how to be an adult and falling in love. She's busy hiding from the Nazis. And I try to make it clear that so many of all the characters are, in their own way, victims of that horrible philosophy. Even the Germans, by the way, even the Nazis in this story, also become victims in one way or another of what they believed in. There's a couple of themes that I threw in, basic ideas that I threw into this book, and one is that people believe not necessarily the truth. They believe what they want to believe. They believe what's convenient for them, what fits into their needs, their wants. I could get very political right now, but I won't because I tend to, but I get very upset sometimes when I hear people. Well, I'll give you the example, which maybe I shouldn't, but I will. There are many people out there. I'll be listening to talks, discussions, political discussions, and they'll start talking about how President Obama was born in Africa, born in Kenya. And the reality is he wasn't. He was no more born in Kenya than I was. But, yeah, I'm sorry. The reality is he was no more born in Kenya than I was. He was born in Hawaii to a white mother and a black father. Simple as that. But if you want to believe that type of thing, you'll seek out the information and the beliefs that say that is so. That's what happened to the German people in many ways. They turned on their neighbors, Jewish neighbors, friends, relatives, in many cases relatives, other family members who happen to be Jewish. They turned on them because they wanted to believe something that fit into their preconceived notions. Yes.
But there are a lot of, this is one of my favorite subjects. My dad fought in that war, and luckily he came home. But I've learned a different perspective. The ordinary German person's respect of the families of what they went through. And they were sympathetic, and very helpful to the Jewish people that were in trouble.
Oh, yes.
It was just that the killing machine was so strong, and they're the ones that had the guns.
Yeah, and you couldn't say
ordinary citizens like us couldn't fight them back.
They couldn't fight back.
Even some of the German generals didn't like what was going on. But they were outnumbered, and it was...
Yeah, they really didn't have a lot of choice in that. Part of the characterization in my book, I make it clear that some of my characters are actually saved, kept alive by German citizens. That's since the end of World War II. That's been an issue that's been discussed many times. How much did the German people really know? Why didn't they fight back? Why didn't they try to stop Hitler? And you can second guess these things as much as possible. However, the fact is that many German people did help hide Jewish citizens. Many German people did do things under the table to try to stop their government. Yeah.
And that again, to reverse that, I think just about when the wall was ending, a lot of Jewish people came out and helped the German soldiers who were just so upset about what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, I cried. I didn't know that aspect had happened.
Yeah. One of the things that people don't realize is there's no simple answers to why this occurred. You want to remember, there were 60 million people who died in World War II, most of them in the European theater. That's incredible when you think about it, the numbers. Just the Battle of Berlin alone took 2 million lives. I mean, that's more than the number of people who lived in Berlin. But it was incredibly violent. And Were there people who could have changed it with their actions? I'm sure there were. Were there people who tried to stop the Nazis? I'm sure there were. But an awful lot of people were traumatized and terrorized. They couldn't do that. Anybody else? Questions? Yes?
How long did it take you to write this book?
About two and a half years. That sounds like a lot of time. The basic fact is you write the book. And I followed Stephen King's advice in his own book on writing. I wrote the book, completed it, and put it aside for 6 months. That's very hard to do, by the way. But I put it aside for 6 months, and eventually I picked it up again, and I rewrote the whole damn thing. I added a character, I changed a few facts and figures and things that I had in my mind that I had to do. And it took a full 2.5 years by the time I got it done. However, getting it published is the worst process on the face of the earth, I will tell you that.
Publish it, or did somebody pick up the book? A publisher pick it up?
It's published by Amazon, which is basically, Amazon did something a few years back that took the old self-publishing route. It used to be that if you self-published, you had to print up 1,000 of them, stick them in your garage, and sell them individually. They don't do that. For example, I'll go home today, I'll probably order 20 books, and they'll be at my house in 3 days. And they can print them right on the spot. Getting published by an independent publisher is almost impossible. And when I say that, I'm not exaggerating. Of every 100,000 books that are written, 34 get published. Think about that. First time novels, of every 100,000 that are written, 34 get published. That's why I decided to go the Amazon route. They make it better. They also pay better than the old-fashioned self-publishing route. So, but it's very, very hard getting published. Do not kid yourself. People, especially years ago when I was teaching part-time, I was teaching at Framingham State College and in Quinsigamon. And the kids would often talk about wanting to write and wanting to be writers. And you don't make any money doing it. Unless you happen to be Stephen King or you happen to be, lucky, you're not going to make a hell of a lot of money selling books. You're really not. That's why, and I'm not joking when I say this. I'm just pleased that I wrote this. I'm just happy that I was able to get this done. I don't care if I make a lot of money. It doesn't matter. I'm retired. I can do what the hell I want anyways. A few advantages of being older. I can do what I want. But you're not, if anybody ever wants to write, you're not going to make a ton of money on it unless you get very, very lucky. Other questions? Yes? Oh, that's all right. Ask away.
Did you actually interview any people that survived the war? Either German or Jewish?
See, I've been very lucky in the fact that I've known a lot of people who survived the war. Like my father's friend who had been a Wehrmacht soldier and was captured at Stalingrad. He's now deceased, but he lived through holy hell, and he saw things. I mean, the Battle of Stalingrad was probably, pound for pound, the worst battle of World War II. It was extensive. It wiped out the entire city when the Germans surrendered, they had already lost 350 to 400,000 soldiers in Stalingrad. That doesn't count the number of Russians killed. So, I mean, it was incredibly violent. There was that one. I knew a guy who was in the Bataan Death March. I've had a number of friends. I was a psychotherapist for many years, and a lot of my clients were World War II veterans. And I got to know a lot of them, and along the way they would share some of the incidents, some of the fears, some of the problems that they'd run into. And again, I'm an old history buff. I'm one of the few fools you'll ever meet who has his own private library, much to my wife's consternation. But But I have a ton of books at home. I read constantly. Most of what I read is World War II stuff. So that's where a lot of my information comes from. Good example, and I don't want to ramble on, which sound like I'm doing, but in the book, there is an incident where the firebombing of Berlin, of Hamburg, is depicted. The firebombing of Hamburg took place over 5 days. It was done by both British and American troops, flyers. The Americans bombed during the day, and the Germans and the English bombed at night. And it totally destroyed the city of Hamburg. In 5 days, it killed over 40,000 people. They were basically incinerated. It's not pretty. Now, I used that incident in the book, but I went back to my library and found a very graphic, bang-by-bang description of what happened during the bombing of Hamburg. And I was able to put that into the book as an incident. Other questions? Okay. Well, I want to thank you all very, very much. I hope you if you choose to buy the book, I hope you enjoy it. I truly hope you do, because if nothing else, reading should be for enjoyment. Thank you again.
I just want to thank Jack for coming out today, and I'm sure he'll stick around for a few moments if anybody has any questions that they'd like to pose to him privately. And again, his book is here. I'm halfway through his book, and I can't wait to get to the end. And I'm learning a lot about my friend. So think about reading it. I think you'll like it. Thank you for coming, and have a great week.